Hi, I'm Noah, and I approve of this message. When you first think of music theory, you think about the concept of how people know which direction the music tends to travel and the rules it must follow to sound good. But eventually, with those rules, it starts to feel like you get stuck in a boring rut where you have to go through the same old counterpoint, the same applied chords to add color, and it just feels like it's cadence after cadence. If only there was another set of rules to follow that would help us listen to music in a completely different way. Have I got a solution for you? Meet Arnold Schoenberg. What did he do? He looked at the current theory of his time and was like, fuck that. I want to write something completely different. We have our dear friend Schoenberg to thank for this final unit I'm taking in Music Theory 3, where we get to write an atonal piece just like him. Wow! Quick explanation, because I plan to show this video to my friends too, not just you, Dr. Bowden. So please ignore my rushed explanation of 12-tone theory. What makes 12-tone theory so interesting, Noah? Well, am I glad you asked. 12-tone theory differs from normal tonal theory because it uses each of the 12 tones in the chromatic scale once before repeating any of them. The 12 tones being C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A sharp, and B, with each tone being assigned a number or a letter, as seen there. I say letter because 10 and 11 most times don't show both numbers. They're replaced with a T or an E, respectively. This is to keep it all down to one character. Each atonal piece has one main row as a baseline for the whole piece, which is a way to arrange the 12 tones in its non-repeating pattern. We then put this row in a matrix to find all the possible ways that we can arrange it for a piece. We do some math for the first row without changing the pattern. Then we find the... Hold on. Hey. Are you falling asleep? Hey! Wake up! Fine. If you're falling asleep, let me simplify it. 12 tones on a chromatic scale. No repeat note until you play note at least once. Put 12 notes in pattern. Put pattern in matrix. Do some silly math. Fill out matrix and choose which patterns to put in your piece. Does that make sense? No? You should have paid attention the first time. Maybe with all this talk of 12-tone music, you just won't get it until you hear it. Let's listen to my piece called Falling Down, but with Occasional Grace. Man, wasn't that hype? Straight fire! They should get me a reward for all of this. What do you mean, how can you call that music? It's so lovely to listen to, and all the phrases make up such a nice pattern. Ugh, get over here, Schoenberg. They don't understand us. Let's take our music elsewhere. Now, you're probably wondering how I wrote this masterpiece. Well, I came up with the idea and the pattern of each of my notes by rolling this 12-sided dice until I had all 12 tones in the prime row. It took me a while to get each of the notes because the dice didn't want to give me a 12 or like a 4. I know I didn't actually have to roll for the 4 because it was the last number, and I could have just done like, what's it called? Process of elimination to find it, but I wanted to do it anyways, and it took me forever. Anyways, with these 12 numbers, I was able to make the prime row. 2, 9, 6, 1, 3, 5, 8, 7, 0, 11, 10, 4. And Then, using this, I subtracted 2 from each of them to make the prime row. Well, to make the P0 row, transposing it so the first note would be C. And this is the way we can format our matrix. We have to have P0 at the beginning because it makes it all nice. Anyways, focusing back to our prime row, the one I'm going to use the most throughout my piece, right here, we could see when I first listened to it, I realized this is strangely tonal. I like the chords and the matrix everywhere here. There's like a lot of 2 4 6, 1 3 5, and I think that led to some fun chords. I typically try to make all of these patterns chords, and when I do use chords, I stay on them long enough so that it feels like you're either hanging on the balance of off balance or hanging balanced. Like when you're about to fall, but you're like balancing in that short moment. Then I also noticed that there's a lot of chromatic intervals of 3 here at the end. And I thought when I put these to triplets, it sounds a lot like someone in a cartoon who's like losing their balance and is about to fall over. So that's where I got my main idea for the name of the piece from. As you. Anyways, all these talk, and then for the phrases, I decided to basically, I looked at the first note and the last note of whatever phrase I just ended and the one I was going to try to start with and try to find the one that best fit that. Or, for the most part, I just did whatever I wanted. It's atonal music. No one's going to really listen to it that hard anyways. So, now that I've talked about my phrases, let's take a look at the whole music and see if we can find them. I don't know about you, but this looks like a whole lot of nothing to me. I don't really see anything. Let me see if I can do some magic to make it appear. There we go. That looks a lot better. We can see all of the phrases now. Please ignore in measure 26 here, where the note is slightly off. The rhythm is off. I had annotated this whole thing and realized I left the note out in this row here. So I just put in the G and imagine that those other 3 notes are a half note triplet. Anyways, let's start off this analysis. I start with 3 rows or three patterns of the prime row. I keep in mind with the in the upper part, that rhythm. I use that again later on. Then we can see I start with prime row in the lower voice as well, but I cut it off just long enough so I can write for my first chord in measure 6. This chord is made out of the numbers 3, 5, 8, and 7. This adds its first bit of color, and I don't sit on it that long, but I do think it's nice to add some dissonance. Then, after you finish the third P2, I go to the inversion 11. An inversion is where we take the prime row and basically invert it, using the numbers that add up to 12 with the prime. You can see it better in this image where it's like going the opposite direction than from the prime original row. In this inversion, you can see that it starts a fifth above where the last note just ended. And note the use of the triplet in the end of the phrase because I realized it was going 1, 2, 3. This is the first of many triplets to come. Then, inversion 11 is followed by retrograde 5 and retrograde inversion 7. Retrograde basically means the inverse of something. So the retrograde 5 is a transposed prime row that starts on 5, but in reverse. And the retrograde inversion 7, retrograde inversion, is the inversion of 7, but reversed. Once again, here's another image to pick it apart a little different. You can see that the retrograde is just the complete reverse of either the prime or the inversion. No, I started the phrase of retrograde 5 in the upper voice, but then used the rest of it in the lower voice. This is a fun way to subtly repeat the notes without breaking the rules. And then I use another triplet, but this one is in half note triplet because it uses the tones of 8, 6, and 4. I typically use these tones for a chord, but I wanted to include another triplet here because the upper voice was busy. Then it ends with a shared F, which will be used later in the next pattern. Then retrograde in version 7, I used another quick triplet for the tones 11, 10, and 9 to make a quick downward before going into the rest of the phrase that adds dissonance. Then we follow this up with P5 again. No, we follow this up with P5. I really enjoyed the chord I came up with in this version of P5, so I made sure to reuse this phrase later on. It sounds like a chord that you'd actually want to listen to, and not just one that's in an atonal piece. After following that, I use P2 again, but this is the exact same that we played in the first time from the very beginning. I wanted to symbolize that maybe the person falling had gained some composure and wasn't falling as hard anymore. And then, but we have the retrograde in version 11 to counteract the earlier in version 11, representing that it's still a little frantic. They don't completely have their balance, but it's to reference the callback is still there in the upper voice. Then we follow this up with another P5. It's not the exact same yet, but we have that chord, but it doesn't have the B. I think this makes it feel a little different, and I like it. I followed it up with in version 7, but with them sharing this G in the upper note, in the upper voice. This is I love the sharing of notes because I think it adds a little more color to how you can write it. Once we end in version 7, I'll use that again to make a P5. And this is the exact same P5 we used earlier with another shared F. This is because I really like this chord, and I wanted to use that one more time before ending. I realized, hold on, we are about to end. So I used a retrograde of the prime row, and notice how each of the values of this prime row each of the notes share the same rhythmic value as they were in the first phrase. This is intentional. I wanted to call back to it, but make it subconscious. Like, you don't know what you're listening to is the exact opposite of what we heard in the beginning, but somewhere in the back of your mind you do. Then fall underneath that, we have the exact same P2 that was in the lower voice that started off. This is another callback, so that way it subconsciously you're starting to think at the beginning of the piece again. Then, because we're using a lot of P5s, I remember using R5 at the very beginning, which is the retrograde 5, and I decided to use retrograde 5 one more time to set up the last prime row. You'll notice that in this prime row, it's the exact same rhythm, but at the end, we have a different way to end with the E's. We go da da bop. That last bop in the lower voice, I think, signifies that the person has fallen over. And they fell, but it was chaotic. But there were some times that they were like, "Ooh, maybe I'm not gonna fall," which I thought was quite fun. I realize now I probably could have called the whole piece "The Inevitable Fall," and it would have also fit. But thank you for watching my final presentation. I hope you enjoyed this little gap about this atonal piece I wrote. Thank you for such a great year, Dr. Bowden, and I'll see you again next year. Whee!